بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته، وأسعدتم صباحا، وشكرا جزيلا على حضوركم الكريم لهذه الجلسات، ونحن نناقش إن شاء الله تجديد علم الكلام والمدرسة الماتريدية بالتحديد، وهي إحدى المدارس الكبرى لأهل السنة والجماعة، نفعنا الله بعلومهم إن شاء الله. I will be speaking in English. سأتحدث بالإنجليزية بسبب كل الطلبة والأساتذة الذين يشاهدون هذه الندوة من خلال الإنترنت إن شاء الله، ولكن مع التطرق للعربية بين الحين والآخر، خاصة فيما يخص المصطلحات وقراءة بعض النصوص. I will be speaking in English for the benefit of the large audience we have through the streaming, and I will be going to Arabic every once in a while for terminological and technical reasons. I will try to leave most of the space for the discussion, so I'll try to be as brief as I can. The topic this morning is creativity or divine creativity in the Maturidi school. And this topic may seem a little bit strange. Why divine creativity? Why now? And why in the Maturidi school? I am an Ash'ari myself, but my country, like many other Arab countries, also enjoyed a very strong presence of Hanafi Maturidi tendencies. The Uthman Pasha Madrasa, where I was teaching in Tripoli, is 450 years old. And in it had Hanafi scholars and Maliki scholars. The Hanafi scholars taught Maturidi Aqidah, and the Maliki scholars taught Ash'ari Aqidah, and oftentimes through the Taftazani and the commentaries on Taftazani, the two schools worked hand in hand. I think we can readily admit that there are some differences, important differences between the two schools, but there is consensus amongst the Ash'aris and the Maturidis that they are both Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and that together they constitute the most important chunk of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah in addition to Ahl al-Hadith. So why this divine creativity in the Maturidi school? A very obvious reason is that Sifat al-Takween or Sifat al-Takhliq, or what is called the trait of creativity or the attribute of creativity in the Maturidi school is actually a fundamental sifa that is treated with the utmost seriousness and respect and is not reduced to other sifat. Meaning, for the Maturidi, Sifat al-Takween is a primordial attribute of the divine essence, and it cannot be reduced to other sifat like irada, will, or qudra, like power, or ilm, or knowledge. And unlike the Ash'aris, they insisted on the qidam of Sifat al-Takween, that this sifa, this attribute, is as primordial as any of the other fundamental sifat, and that it cannot simply be reduced to a combination of, for example, qudra and irada, or irada and ilm. And there was a huge discussion regarding the sifa amongst the Ash'aris and the Maturidis. Some Ash'aris saying that the attribute of creativity is primordial or is qadim would lead to qidam al-alam. So they objected to this claim of the qidam of Sifat al-Takween. And the Maturidis replied to these objections quite strongly. In today's discussion, I will be relying on a book which was elegantly and recently edited, called شرح العمدة في عقيدة أهل السنة والجماعة المسمى بالاعتماد في الاعتقاد. The author is Abu al-Barakat al-Nasafi, who died in around 710 Hijri, 1310 Miladi. This was edited by Dr. Abdullah Ismail at a German university. He's also a professor at Kulliyat al-Usul al-Din in the Azhar Sharif. the reason I'm using this particular book is because it kind of summarizes the discussions, and it's a very useful book. I will be reading from it every once in a while just to stress what we're talking about. Let's begin by reading the opening of the chapter, which is called فصل في صفة التكوين. الشيخ رحمة الله عليه يقول: اعلم أن التكوين والتخليق والخلق والإيجاد والإحداث والاختراع أسماء مترادفة. So the Shaykh begins by claiming that takween or constituting, takhliq, creating, al-khalq, creativity, al-ijad, bringing into being, al-ihdath, making something new, al-ikhtira', inventing, all of these words are synonymous, he says. And this is a very significant claim. مترادفة يراد بكلها معنى واحد. They are synonymous, and what is intended by them is a single meaning. وهو, what is this meaning? إخراج المعدوم من العدم إلى الوجود. Bringing that which isn't from nihility into being. That is the meaning of صفة التكوين. إخراج المعدوم من العدم إلى الوجود. And we will come back to this claim. فنخص لفظة التكوين اقتفاء للسلف. We choose the word تكوين because we follow the Salaf. So amongst all the words that are available, تكوين, تخليق, خلق, إيجاد, إحداث, اختراع, we choose تكوين basically to follow the tradition of the Salaf. فيكون التكوين غير المكون. And this is a very important claim by the Maturidis, that creativity is other than the created. And this is a very important claim because it contrasts very clearly with the Ash'ari position and also the Mu'tazili position, where the takween and the mukawwan are actually one. There is no distinction between the takween and the mukawwan. And the reason for much of the contentions and the argumentation is basically this basic fundamental presupposition. The Maturidis believe that takween is غير المكون, that the creativity itself or the creating itself is other than that is created, versus the Ash'aris who believe that the takween or the creating or the creativity is actually the same as the created. So the Shaykh says, and I will read the entire paragraph: اعلم أن التكوين والتخليق والخلق والإيجاد والإحداث والاختراع أسماء مترادفة يراد بكلها معنى واحد، وهو إخراج المعدوم من العدم إلى الوجود. فنخص لفظة التكوين اقتفاء للسلف فيكون التكوين غير المكون. وهو, and then he proceeds to define what تكوين is. صفة, it's an attribute of Allah Azza wa Jalla, a trait of Allah Azza wa Jalla. صفة أزلية, primordial, pre-temporal, prior to time. Okay? صفة أزلية قائمة بذات الله تعالى. Okay, it's very difficult to translate قائمة and not fall into difficult problematics. Okay, قائمة بذات الله تعالى, established essentially in the very essence of Allah Azza wa Jal, and the English here just can't do justice to the Arabic. قائمة بذات الله تعالى, sustained by divine essence. كجميع صفاته, like all other attributes, like all other traits, divine traits. وهو, and this takween, this creating or creativity, and I will come back to this issue of creating, creativity and creation. Okay? وهو تكوين للعالم, it is a creating of the whole world, ولكل جزء منه, and of every part of it, لوقت وجوده, according to the time of its existence. And this is extremely important. It is not simply the making or the creating of the world and all its parts, but the creating of the world and its parts according to the allotted time for that part's existence or for that world's existence. كما أن إرادته صفة أزلية تتعلق بها المرادات, just as in the case of divine will, the irada, We have muradat, those things that are willed, objects of will, actually somehow are related to the sifa of irada, to the attribute of irada, لِوَقْتِ وُجُودِهَا, according to the time of their existence, which is another very important point. على الترتيب والتوالي, sequentially, order in an orderly and sequential way. So just as divine will is kind of related to by the objects of irada, and whereby that which is willed comes forth into existence according to a particular order and sequence, the Shaykh claims the same thing with the sifa of taqween. Okay? وَكَذَا قُدْرَتَهُ أَزَلِيًّا, and the same with the qudra. وَكُلُّ جُزْءٍ مِنَ الزَّاءِ مَخْلُوقٍ لِلَّهِ تَعَالَى لِدُخُولِهِ تَحْتَ تَكْوِينِهِ. So everything that is in the universe is actually coming under the taqween, the creating of the divine creating or the creativity of Allah Azza wa Jal. And again, related in such a way that it comes forth into existence in its allotted time. Let me stop reading the text a little bit and go back to the problematic. Aristotle in the Metaphysics, book Beta Metaphysics, says that before you address any issue, you have to enumerate the problematics, what he called aporia. Aporia is a knot, is a uqda, as we say. You have to enumerate the uqad or the problematics. And what I would like to do this morning in this brief session that we have and then the discussion is just to speak about the problematic of creativity, creation, and the creativity of Allah Azza wa Jal as a sifa. There is a way of doing this in a classical way of saying this is the Maturidi position, this is the Ash'ari position on the sifat al-taqween. But why is this of relevance? That's what's most important for us, because we are not treating Kalam as a museum piece. We're not treating Kalam as a stuffy collection or archive of historical positions. We are treating Kalam as a re-articulation of our very faith for our times. It is a refreshing of the divine discourse for our times. And it is in this refreshing sense that I believe that a discourse on Sifat al-Taqween is important. The reconsideration of the heritage of the Maturidi school on creativity is very important. Let me put it this way. The names and the attributes of Allah Azza wa Jal are many. Which names and attributes every generation focuses on and articulates the most tends to affect the teaching, it tends to affect the pastoral work, the preaching in the mosques, and it tends to affect the very raising of new generations. For example, if you make the attribute of irada so essential in your time, and all your talk is about irada, and if all you teach in your schools is how to align your irada with the divine irada, you end up with a very legalistic, juridical approach to being a Muslim. If, on the other hand, you focus on rahmah, for example, and you make that your focus, you will end up with a very different way of teaching and presenting the faith. If you talk about creativity, divine creativity, and uphold divine creativity as a central attribute that is worthy of discussion and consideration, then you open up ways of engaging the entire discourse that we have today on creation. Okay? And there is a huge discussion, both philosophical and theological, on what's called the problem of creation and the problem of design, the problem of attunement in physics. And we have eminent scholars who have written books on this, from the book on occasionalism to the books on Daqiq al-Kalam, to the books of Sheikh Sa'id, to the books on Ghazali, to all of these scholars are my teachers, and I have much to learn from them. But I believe that in order to engage the contemporary discussion on creation, we need to reconsider the discourse on creation in the Maturidi school. Because of all the schools, they've paid most attention to it. And they have spent more time justifying that it is sifa qadima and trying to articulate what it is. What is this creativity? And let me go back to the problem of translation, because the problem of translation also indicates a problem of meaning in the very Arabic. Okay? When we say sifat al-takween, when we say at-takween, are we talking about creating with an ing? Or are we talking about creation with an ion? Or are we talking about creativity as a trait or sifa? Okay? Which one is it? Or is it all of them? And is the reason for some of the conflation we have, and many of the fights we had in the past, a kind of conflation between these various meanings? Something very similar happens with the sifa of kalam. And let me just go to that a little bit and then come back to creativity. If I say, Imran speaks English. It's a very simple sentence. Imran speaks English. What do I mean by that? Do I mean Imran is now speaking English right now? He's not, because he's silent. Do I mean that Imran's fundamental language or essential language is English? That is not true, because his essential language is Malay, or what we call mother tongue is Malay. Okay, Bahasa Malay. Now, what do we mean he speaks English? Right now, the way I used it normally would mean that he has the competence, to use the term from Chomsky, he has the competence to speak English. Okay? But I'm not claiming that he is performing, again to use a Chomskyan distinction, that he's performing the speaking of English now. Okay? So, it's true that Imran speaks English, and it's false that Imran speaks English at the same time. Why? Because it's true that he has the competence to speak English, but it is not true that he's right now, at this moment, performing the speaking of English. Okay? When we say sifat al-kalam or sifat al-takween, do we mean a competence or do we mean a performance? That's very important, because much of the conflation happens because of this. In Arabic, when you say sifat al-takween, it could be other way. It could be that you are meaning divine competence to create, and that's definitely how can we say? It's not temporal, like it's pre-temporal with the very essence of Allah Azza wa Jal. Because there is no time nor pre-time in which the divine essence cannot create. Okay? It's a contradiction to say that he is God and that he cannot create. So it is very much sifa qadima as a competence of the divine. But what about performance? Is the performance qadima as well? That is precisely why the Ash'aris were quite worried about this. Because if you believe that the performance of creativity, the actual performance of creating, is actually primordial, pre-time, that will lead you straight into qidam al-alam. Okay, the primordiality of the world, which, as we know, all our mashayikh, Maturidis and Ash'aris, and Imam Ghazali is famous for this in Tahafut al-Falasifa. This is a maqula kufriya, as they say, an infidel position. You cannot say this and hope to be an Orthodox Muslim. Okay, of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Al-qawl bi qidam al-alam, saying that the world is primordial, that it has no beginning, is a position of the ancient naturalistic Greeks, which now has its own proponents in Cambridge and Oxford and many universities of modern physics. Al-qawl bi qidam al-alam takes you out of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So you cannot say that the takween as a performance was primordial. So takween as a performance cannot be qadim, but takween as a competence definitely is. Now, when you say that takween as a competence definitely is, and performance isn't, you resolve about 60% of the issues between the Maturidis and the Ash'aris on this position. Because really, the Ash'ari objections to the al-qawl biqidam sifat al-takween stems from their fear that it would lead to qidam al-alam. Okay? So you take care of 60%. What about the other 40%? The other 40% have to do with the problematic of the relationship between dimensions of attributes. And this is very complex, and I know of no other person who quite recognized this complexity and tried to expound as much on it as the school of Ibn Arabi rahmatullah. They really worked very hard to deal with this complexity of sorts. Is takween or create reducible to ilm, qudra and irada? So for example, if God is able to create through power, to create qudra, wills to create through irada, and creates according to his knowledge, ilm, is that it, and by the way, يعني language breaks down when we try to talk about these things. يعني astaghfirullah azza wa jal on all this breakdown of language, because it's very difficult to speak of these realities. Is the combination of qudra, irada, and ilm sufficient for takween so that you don't need to talk about a sifat takween? Because the 40% of the Ash'ari objections to the Maturidism is precisely that why need a sifat takween that is qadim when you have qudra qadima, irada qadima, ilm qadim? Between qudra, irada, and ilm, you can have the creating happening without saying that there is a sifat takween qadima. Okay? The Imam Nasafi, Abu al-Barakat, there are lots of Nasafis. This is the latest Nasafi. This is the Sahib al-Tafsir, Abu al-Barakat. Actually ends this chapter with a very interesting paragraph in which he says, قُلْنَا. Okay? He says if the Ash'aris say that qudra is sufficient, قُلْنَا. What is his reply? الوقوع لا يكون بالقدرة بل بالإيقاع. The happening does not happen through mere power, but through the making happen. Okay? فالوجود being, فالوجود بالإيجاد, by making be. It is not by mere being. Okay? والقدرة, القدرة, the divine power, ليكون الفاعل في فعله مختارا غير مضطر. For him, power merely means that the doer or the maker has a choice and is not forced to make. For him, qudra is. والإرادة, will, for him, ليخرج المفعول على التوالي والنظام. Will is to bring forth that which is done or made in a orderly and sequential manner. Okay? والعلم ليخرج على الإحكام. So that with knowledge means it will come out in a perfect way, in a way that is well made. So for him, qudra and irada and ilm are all important, but you still need the actual ijad, the actual making be, the actual bringing forth, as he put it in the first paragraph, from nihility into being. Okay? Now, one more point regarding the difference between the Ash'aris and the Maturidis, and then we'll go back to the contemporary implications of all this. He claims, the Shaykh rahmatullahi alayh, that the Ash'aris and the Mu'tazila believe that the takween and the mukawwin wahid, that the actual creating and the created are one. And he objects to this, and he says, وَهُوَ muhal. This is impossible. And he gives basically two reasons, or two arguments. The first argument is a linguistic argument, which he says is intuitive. He says, لأن القول باتحاد التكوين والمكون, if you say that the creating is the same as the created, كالقول بأن الضرب عين المضروب. It's as if you say hitting and that which is hit are the same. والأكل عين المأكول, and eating and that which is eaten is the same. والقتل عين المقتول, and killing and that which is killed is the same. and يعرف بالبديهة. And this is corrupted. Just intuitively we know this. Now, if I may say, and some of the Ash'aris have objected, the examples he uses are all from الفعل المتعدي, فعل that needs a مفعول. Okay? If you actually say, if you use a فعل لازم like مشى, if I say مشى عبد الرحمن or مشى سهيل, المشي, the act of walking, is عين المشي, is actually the same as the walking, okay, or the walk. So عبد الرحمن's walk is his walking, and Suhail's talk is his talking. Okay, so the Ash'aris would say, yes, the acting is the act. Okay, while the Shaykh actually uses أفعال متعدية to say no, it's not. We'll come back to this point. Okay, because it's extremely important also for contemporary physics. The second argument he uses to object to the claim that التكوين والمكون واحد, he says لو كان المكون وحصول المكون بالتكوين لكان حصول المكون بنفسه. If creating is the same as the created, then the created was made by the very creating of itself, which is a kind of dawr. It also involves, as he points out, ta'til, because then it will be self-made and not divinely made. Okay? So you can see the problematic between the Maturidis and the Ash'aris is not a mere lafzi ikhtilaf, as some of the people trying to reconcile some of the utterances of the two schools sometimes say, but it actually points to, going back to Aristotle's word, an aporia. It's a problematic. Okay? All we hope to do this morning is to simply point you to the problematic and tell you that there is, as to put it in the common American term, there is gold in them hills. There is gold in this topic. If you actually look at it carefully, there is much gold in it. Why? Because when the Shaykh says that takween or creating is the bringing forth from nihility into being or into existence, bringing forth what? He says al-ma'doom, ikhraj al-ma'doom. But notice there is something weird here. It's as if there is a domain called Adam, and then there is another domain called wujud or existence, and then there is a murajjih who takes from the Adam into the wujud. But takes what? Takes the ma'doom. But is the ma'doom shay? And this is the problematic of shay'iyyat al-ma'doom, as the mashayikh have discussed. And it's a very important problematic. And shay'iyyat al-ma'doom, as discussed by the great scholars of Kalam, is far more advanced than the discussion in the theory of objects by Meinong, for example, in contemporary philosophy. Meinong has this problem that he talks about in his books. He says there is something very strange about an impossible object, like a squared circle. Squared circle is impossible. But notice, even though squared circle is impossible, I can make various truth claims about it. For example, a squared circle is a squared circle. That's a true statement. A squared circle is circular. That is true. A squared circle is squared. That's also true. Three sentences that are true about an object that's impossible. It's not only ma'doom, it's actually not even mumkin. Okay? It is not possible. Okay? This ontology of what's called ontology of impossibilia. Okay? The discussion of the type of being that impossibilia has, which is discussed in what's called the theory of objects in contemporary philosophy, especially in Meinong and his followers, is heavily discussed by our mashayikh in the chapters on shay'iyyat al-ma'doom. So when the Shaykh says that takween is ikhraj al-ma'doom min al-adam ila al-wujud, what does that mean? This divine or intentionality, okay, that points or focuses on the nothing to make it into something is really absolutely weird, okay, very strange. And human language breaks down. As Shaykh Ahmad Rifa'i rahmatullah alayhi, following a saying attributed to Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, I do not know of the veracity of the attribution, عن الإدراك إدراك. The mind breaks down at these limits, language breaks down at these limits, and it's arrogant to think that we can actually articulate anything meaningful about this, and yet we're challenged to do so because there are people out there who question the very existence of our Maker, who question the very essence of our religiosity, who question the divine itself. Okay? So we're forced to articulate Kalam as best as we can, knowing already that we will fail, and knowing that we'll make lots of mistakes. I've already made, I counted them in my head, at least 25 mistakes as I speak now. Okay? Just because of the limits of human language. So when we say إخراج المعدوم من العدم إلى الوجود, what does that mean? And is this معدوم in some sort of a domain of divine knowledge, of even impossibilia? And it is from that domain of divine knowledge that معدوم is taken out. It's very difficult. It's the same difficulty that Professor Atta'i is facing in quantum mechanics. And that is a key point. What is precisely at the edge where subatomic particles pop into being? The neutrino is at one moment not, and all of a sudden, atemporally even, it is. And now you see it, now you don't kind of phenomenon that bewildered Heisenberg and the various quantum physicists is precisely the issue the Ash'aris and the Maturidis dealt with. We have this brilliant book on occasionalism that was recently published. We're very proud of it, and I'm glad the author is amongst us. The problem of the Jawahir and the A'rad and the Juz' الذي لا يتجزأ of these indivisible particles is not the particle and the attribute it takes, or that it can sustain. The problem is the very bringing into being of the particle from nihility. How does that happen? What the Mashayikh here, when they talk about Sifat al-Takween, they're talking about is precisely an edge phenomenon. In physics, there's something which is called an edge phenomenon. The physics of the bottom of the water in this glass is completely different than what happens at the surface. Phenomena like surface tension, for example, are not there at the bottom, but they are there at the top. Okay? And they're precisely where the glass and the water meets. These phenomena that we can call barzakhi, okay, between nihility and being. This is where creativity happens. And it doesn't happen pre-temporally in the sense that there is time and then there is before time, and it's happening before time, because the notion of happening before time is actually strange. The ing without time is very difficult to deal with. It's actually happening at every moment now, because time itself is not a containment of the creating, but itself is created. Okay? So the Mashayikh, when they say إخراج المعدوم من العدم إلى الوجود, it's stretching a lot. إخراج what if it is nothing? And إخراج is an activity. Activity always needs time. This is not a temporal activity. Divine creativity is not a temporal activity. And yet, because of verbs that we have to use, okay, the verbs already imply time. And we're talking about atemporal activity, divine activity. And yet we're claiming that time itself is created. This is the problematic of Sifat al-Takween. And it is not an old problematic of the Abbasid period or the Seljuqi period. This is a problematic of today, of quantum physics. Okay? And if you want to talk about this now, you need to know the sciences of today, And those who do science today who want to also be Muslims must look at what these mashayikh have said, because what they have said is actually amazingly important. In the very right, amongst the Ash'aris and the Maturidis, there is a huge riches to be learned from. The other issue is this notion of sequentialness, sequence, series, time, you know, على النظم والترتيب والتوالي وأن يخلقه لوقت وجوده. What does that mean? Chronology, but chronos, time itself, is created. Yeah? So what does it mean to have a sequence, a series? And you know, it's very strange, but you may think that all series have to be temporal. And we can use a very simple example to show you that that does not need to be the case. If I say you have 10 states, state 1, state 2, state 3, state 4, state 5, up to 10. And I can now state them. State 1, state 2, state 3. This is very much sequential, temporal. But in my mind, I can imagine a mathematical line with these 10 states placed on that line. And in a moment of imagination, I can see the series without time. In a glimpse, you can see it without temporality. You need not see the actual unfolding of the series. You can actually have a series atemporally conceived. And this is what we call an algorithm in computer science. An algorithm can be run. For example, if you go on a DOS machine in the old days or now on these new machines and you say, here is the algorithm or the program, hit run, and it runs. When it runs, it's running temporally, صح? It's running in a sequence on your screen. But what is the ontology of the algorithm when it's not run? The algorithm, as conceived by the programmer or the mathematician, is actually in a state of atemporality. It belongs to a domain of ideas, mathematical abstraction, where there is no sequence. There is no sequence. And yet, sequentiality is part of what an algorithm is about. Without sequentiality, you cannot conceive of an algorithm, but it need not be an exercised or performed sequentiality. So, Shaykh say, it is qadim, and that it is related to the murad, or the maqdur, or the mukawwan. This relationship, but it is liwaqtihi, or liwaqti wujudihi, as per the time for it coming into existence. Which means, and this is the point that Nasafi tries to make, it is possible to perceive of a primordial, pretemporal, atemporal competence of the divine to create, and to actually conceive of it, already implying sequential temporality, without that sequential temporality also being primordial, which means it will not make you fall into qidam al-alam. So the Maturidi position is by no means superficial or simple. Okay? It's actually very close to the latest in contemporary physics, and can engage contemporary physics at the highest level only if we pay attention to it. The entire exercise of what Kalam Research and Media tries to do, in cooperation with the John Templeton Foundation and with all our various partners in over 50 universities, and with these eminent scholars, is precisely this kind of retrieval of the wisdom and the learning of our mashayikh, and the re-invoking of this wisdom, re-articulating of it so that it can engage contemporary physics, contemporary biology, contemporary human sciences, contemporary psychology, contemporary sociology. We need to re-articulate our faith because we're losing our young people. We're losing our young people to two forms of corruption. First, a flattened, simplified, I would say secularized and materialized Islam that is actually a mutilation of what the tradition is about, and an atheism which is actually spreading very rapidly in even Arab countries that used to be where it was inconceivable. We have a lot of young atheists today precisely because when they think of Islam, they think of these Daesh and Qaeda and some of these flattened schools that have nothing to do with Ash'arism or Maturidism or the great traditions and the depths of our amazing culture and amazing faith. We need to stop this, and we need to be proud of our Maturidi sheikhs. We need to be proud of our Ash'ari sheikhs, and to go back to their books not as museum pieces or to be memorized and repeated, but to actually re-invoke them in a way that is meaningful to contemporary times. Forgive me if I've taken too long or if I have overdone it with the abstractions at times, but it was just an attempt to say something afresh about this topic, and I am sure I failed multiple times, and will be sure to correct me during the discussions inshallah. بارك الله لي ولكم في هذا الدين العظيم وفي هذا التراث العظيم، واستسمحكم بأن نقرأ الفاتحة على روح المؤلف وأرواح جميع المشايخ الذين ستذكر أسماءهم في هذه الندوة، لأن قراءة الفاتحة على أرواح المشايخ إن شاء الله تحضر بركاتهم إن شاء الله وتمدنا بأمدادهم وأنوارهم. الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. بارك الله فيكم. Can someone help with the microphone, please? Zakaria. Keep one and then we can get to.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First of all, I would say, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad. Because I feel this is the most eloquent talk about such an important subject, which you have tackled through the approach of Daqiq al-Kalam. This is the true Daqiq al-Kalam in the contemporary of work that I am fighting to put our heritage of the Ash'arite, Maturidi, and even Mu'tazilite works. You have pinpointed, Dr. Aref, serious points in the Maturidi understanding of Taqween, and you gave very good reasons. You gave the very good reasons for claiming such a difference between Taqween and Mukawwan, and they are not one. Indeed, the Islamic approach, or in general, I would say Maturidi, Mu'tazili, even Mu'tazili and Ash'ari, they nowadays are open to our further work in putting these terms into modern perspective, in the modern perspective. And you correctly, I feel, identified that the problem is connected with ontology and epistemology. When you talk about algorithm, before pressing the key run, you are actually talking about epistemology. But when you press the key run, you are changing the program into ontology, action, series of chronological actions. Before doing that, before it's atemporal, as you said. It's atemporal, but then it becomes a temporal sequence of events. Here I may add one thing. In physics, we know now that there are two regions of the space-time. The first is called the time-like region in which we are living. Our universe is a time-like, shubuh zamani. We live in a world which is shubuh zamani, in which chronology applies, which is temporal. And there is the other region which is not well studied, which is called space-like. In a space-like region, you don't have time, actually. You have sequence not of events, but of positions. And you can recognize the development through moving into space, through space, like you run through the algorithm of the computer science, for example. Here we have our Sheikh Muhammad Zaki. He is one of the prominent, he taught me computing, by the way, more than 40 years ago. The early, in 1973, I remember already. He knows very well that when you write an algorithm, you write a program, you are actually inventing sequence, but not in time, in positions, in places. And this is a sort of a space-like existence. So we can say that the khalq or the queen has already been in the divine knowledge, epistemologically. Since the divine is not a time-like concept, it could be understood in the space-like frame. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Aref. I am very delighted to hear this from you and understand how deep you have gone into the understanding of the physics of quantum vacuum. Thank you.
Take a questions.
I do understand the divine competence, but using the example that you have just used about the algorithm, and I still think that in as much as human language is limited, also our examples will be limited.
صح.
And at least from where I stand, even when you have it as you are trying to have it as a latent program, but that's still ontological.
صح.
So you read from Nasafi that the terms Ifa and Majaz are all asma mutarabiqa. I just have a very simple question. In the literature, all these terms are very differentiated.
Yeah.
Majaz,
Yeah.
they're all used very differently. And so I'm just wondering if you can perhaps explain the differences and how these terms are used in the literature.
For the sake of the audience outside, please state the name and the affiliation when you ask the question, so for the archive.
My name is Mark. confidence begin really at a higher level. And I really appreciate your talk as Dr. Altai, as it goes deeper and deeper, and it relates Kalam to contemporary physics, and also to the philosophical depth of the certain problem we are just doing. It is very important to understand the interrelations of these problems. It is not just a problem in Kalam, but relates to philosophy, modern science, as well as some other disciplines, maybe like language. And I would like to just point out this aspect. Maybe it may help to widen the horizon of the discussion. You just referred to the problem of language and give the example of creating out of nothing. How to mean takes the proposition mean seems to imply that there is something before. But language, as we use it, might be problematic, as we know from the 20th century philosophy, because all the main Western philosophy in the 20th century emphasized how confusing phenomena language is.
Yeah.
How philosophical problems arise out of confusion about language. And just to emphasize this point clearly, for example, we use the term unicorn and make the statement unicorns do not exist. And this was the negative existential. But it seems that this sentence is contradictory because you say unicorn, you refer to something, or third person refer to something, but then you say it doesn't exist. Seems to affirm and deny the same thing at the same time. And this gave rise to a big theory in philosophy of language, starting with Frege.
Yeah.
However, Minor takes, as you emphasize, another line. Russell takes another line. Russell says, for example, we don't have to reify the terms we are using.
Yeah.
The terms do not have to always refer to something ontologically real or existent. But the term within a sentence, within the context of sentence, can give a different meaning. And the term by itself doesn't have a meaning, but within the sentence it gains a meaning. This is part of the position presented by Russell. So when you use the term within the sentence, it doesn't have a meaning separately, but the sentence, by being a part of a certain structure, it gains a meaning. So, the Kalam Mutakallimun, as Mehmet Bey here knows better and emphasized in his work, mainly relied on language, how the Arabic language is used. But language is one level of discourse, semantics and pragmatics, and the meaning is another level of discourse. We have to differentiate the language, terms, and all the speaking discourse from the meaning discourse, and try to understand the text from that perspective. Maybe we can go deeper and deeper if we take this perspective. If we see language can deceive us in a certain way.
Can we stop here and answer? And then
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nazir. Before the can I get the name?
Yes, I'm Hadiya Zurada, Harvard.
if I may just
Yeah.
reply, because so not to lose the.
Yeah, we like from
okay.
Aref to
So, I want to reply in one reply that kind of integrates the various reflections that we heard from our my teachers and my models of scholarship. I am too polluted now by politics and wars and peacemaking and so on too. So I am forgive me if I'm rusty, but let me start addressing Professor Ta'i's position. Thank you very much, and your assurance of this little student of yours is quite important for me, because at least I know that I'm not completely out to lunch, maybe partly out to lunch. So thank you very much for that. But what you say about ontology and epistemology, and I would like to add axiology, and the distinction between them is actually both important and problematic. As you know, and this classification comes from 18th century German philosophers. I think it was Baumgarten who first made this distinction in this particular way, but based on some Hellenistic classifications. You can say that the science of being is ontology, the science of knowledge is epistemology, and the science of values is axiology. And this tripartite division is actually quite useful at one level, but it's also problematic. Because being that is not known doesn't seem to be being, meaning already involved in the very notion of being is that it's known somehow, okay? Meaning being that is in the total darkness of no knowledge whatsoever seems to be the nihility in many ways, okay? So there is a relationship between being and knowing that is actually quite deep. Also, being is not neutral. Being is of value. Okay? And here I would like to say about a story that is written in one of the biographies of Sheikh al-Sabti, who was buried in Marrakesh. It is said that Ibn Rushd, the philosopher, sent one of his students to check why Sabti's prayers were always answered. كان مستجاب الدعوة السبتي. So Ibn Rushd sent a spy to check why is this guy mustajab الدعوة. So the student came back and he said, I did not find that many prayers or recitations, but he did something very peculiar, in that every time somebody came to ask for a prayer, he would tell him to give sadaqah, and then he would pray and it will come through. Ibn Rushd said, ذلك الرجل علم أن الوجود ينفعل بالجود. Okay? الوجود ينفعل بالجود. And it may seem like just a passing thing, but it's very important. What is the relationship between divine generosity and creation? Does God create? And when you say because of, this is a problem, because it sounds like causality, okay? Does divine generosity, divine mercy, divine compassion, divine, let's use the Arabic words, الجود الإلهي, الرحمة, الحن, الود الإلهي, are they related to ontology? I think they are. The reason being is Allah Azza wa Jal teaches us through Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, man la yarham la yurham, for example. واسع كل شيء رحمة. Now, what does that mean? You know, this notion that there is a sprinkling of rahmah from the very beginning of the universe. Okay? This is important. Why? Because our being in Islam is not a cold being of the natural physicists of Newton's times. Our being is actually a being that is Rahmani already. Okay? And that is actually not only affected by Rahmah, but actually can be understood through Rahmah. Meaning, when you have Rahmah of His khalq, because knowledge is a type of Rahmah, and because being is already saturated by Rahmah, okay? To use a term, saturated phenomena as in Marion, there is already a Rahmah that is implicit in being. So what I'm trying to tell you is, CD, is that ontology and epistemology and axiology are not so clearly separated. And that's why the ulama of Islam, in order to learn, to have knowledge, he needs to learn being. And in order to learn being, he actually has to practice rahmah. He has to practice jood. So the very generosity of the sheikh, it's not a coincidence that if you go to the sheikh in his madrasa or in his majlis of dars, you don't only get spiritual and intellectual food, you normally get food. You actually eat. Okay? That's why the shuyukh used to feed their students. Okay? Because this generosity is actually part of the very learning, it's of the ontology. This is an important thing to remember about this distinction. Another thing to remember is that both space-like, time-like, already have within that very phrase the other part, meaning space-like is already temporal to some extent, and time-like is already spatial. Reason being, if you have a cartography, a mapping of positions, you said yourself, you can move from one position to another. How can you move without time? So already temporality is implied in space-like. Come to time-like. How can you think of sequence without having a kind of a spatial separation between states? So, and that's why the word like is used. That's the word, because it's not only temporal and it is not only spatial. So the two are quite eminently connected. And that brings us to Sidi Sheikh Maulana Busoya's point. He's right, the examples I used already break down. Okay, already break down. An algorithm is quite limited also. Any example you use, وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. This is the beauty of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. They have certain kind of decisive principles that crush any human attempt at arrogance. So if you think you understood anything about him, فهو بخلاف ذلك. If you think that you have idrak, then you've missed the point. Okay? The ajiz happens not because we say, al-ajiz an idrak, so I don't try. Ajiz, by definition, is attempting and failing. We already know that the very attempt at kalam is doomed to failure. How can you talk about what that of the one who can only talk about himself, who we cannot talk about because our language is human for human things and we're dealing with the divine. So we're doomed to failure by our very essence, who we are. Okay, we are khata. Okay, but we keep returning. وَخَيْرُ خَطَّئِينَ التَّوَّابُونَ. We keep returning, and tawbah here, we keep trying. It is like windshield wipers on a car. When it's raining, do you only do the wiping once? Or do you keep wiping even though you know that the rain is going to come? So all our language, all our examples will fail, Sidi Sheikh. You're absolutely right. But they're helpful, especially for engineers, young people who studied in physics, in mathematics. It's important. And when you look at the philosophy of mathematics, which that's absolutely, and Sidi Nadif, the author of that book on occasionalism that we're so proud of, mentions the problematic of Russell and Meinong, and this is huge. Okay, علم الكلام was الكلام عن كلام الله. Okay, it is by essence linguistic, but it does fail. And yet, we have to keep trying, and we have to say why it is that we're failing. And you mentioned pragmatics. Okay? Pragmatics is very important. The praxis of talking about the divine is an elegant art, which was taught in schools through adab al-bahth wal-munadara. It's not just free for all. There is an adab al-bahth wal-munadara that actually gave you the choreographical rules for engaging in this pragmatics that touched upon meanings. It wasn't to deliver meanings, it was actually to kind of tease meanings so that you can hover around them. What Edmund Husserl called the method of variation. You keep trying and trying and trying, and the essence you will never get to, but it will shine forth through the very in-between that is between us. So discussion, علم الكلام without إن قلتم قلنا, cannot happen. This notion that you can learn Aqidah just by memorizing sentences is quite dumb. And it flattens Islam. And that is why we have a lot of dead people who are dead up here, because they're never used to discussion. And when they cannot discuss, they go to the gun immediately. They blow themselves up because they cannot handle difference up here. The madrasa of our Ash'ari and Maturidi scholars used to teach how to maneuver, how to move. It was like the Muhammad Ali method. I'm not talking about the Pasha of Egypt. I'm talking about the boxer. Okay? To hover like a butterfly. Hover around the essence. And every once in a while you sting like a bee, you get an insight. The beauty of getting this insight, what the mashayikh called nadar. Nadar is actually a magnificent experience. There is a kind of spiritual life through kalam, through philosophy. That's why it's not a contradiction to find that Qushayri is a mutakallim and Sufi, or that Ibn Furak is a mutakallim and Sufi. Nearly all of them had very developed spiritual lives, very developed linguistic skills, very developed artistic skills. They loved art, they loved beauty, they loved architecture. And all of that was part of who they are and what Islam is about. We're losing this. I lived in Malaysia and I had the honor of the company of for about a year in Kuala Lumpur. And the saddest thing I saw in Malaysia was when people went to these beautiful forests full of birds and animals and different plants, and they burned them down to create haze, okay? And then they till the land and they plant only one type of stock, and that is rubber, okay? And palm oil, okay? And it's so ugly. It's a single crop, no variety, and this destroys nature. We're doing the same thing to our Islamic tradition. We are destroying Ash'arism, Maturidism, everything that this is so deep. Tasawwuf, we're destroying all this. Art, calligraphy, okay, architecture, we're destroying all this. And we think that Aqidat al-Islam can be taught in a kurras of 20 pages that is taught by route to people, and that is actually making them mujassima and making them into secularists. Because what does secular mean? It means that you're close to things of the spirit, of the divine. We are actually destroying the sacred, to put it in Mirkia Eliades terms of the sacred and the profane. We're making religion itself profane. So when young people reject it, don't blame them, because they don't see anything divine or sacred about what they're being taught. Our attempts here amongst these great scholars is to try to bring back a glimpse of what we used to have in the old Ottoman madrasas, in Azhar and Qarawiyyin, in Jaghbub, in the Quds, in Al-Haram al-Qudsi, in the madrasas of Mecca and Medina. Did you know that the four madhabs used to be taught in Mecca and Medina, you know? And that Ilm al-Kalam used to be taught in Medina at one point. It's all destroyed, with the exception of some pockets, some mashayikh. May Allah Azza wa Jal retrieve all that tradition within that important country. So, forgive me if I have the mathematics, and thank you very much, Professor, for coming. Yani really, this is, you know, I find it most fascinating, and I think Ash'aris and Maturidis, that young people, I encourage you, read Frege on the concept of function. What does function mean? You know, you go to mathematics class and they tell you a function correlates items from a domain with items from the range. But that's an activity, no? It's not just a map. It can be a flat atemporal map, but it's actually an activity. So they sometimes teach us in mathematics that a function is like a machine. You put x and you put y and you get x plus y. So it's like a machine. What does it mean to have an algorithm or a mathematical function? What does a Turing machine, to put it in Alan Turing's terms, where does it exist? Is a Turing machine made in plastics? And definitely it can be embodied in a Macintosh or an IBM machine or a Dell. But the essence of a Turing machine is quite abstract. Okay? It's actually quite abstract. It's a mathematical concept. Von Neumann worked on this. Max Wiener worked on this. This stuff is Ash'arite. This stuff is Maturidi. It's just that we're not recognizing it and we're not putting it one and one together. People should find it natural to work at MIT and Harvard, at Al-Azhar and Qarawiyyin all at once. Unfortunately, there are only a few scholars who still do this. Taha Abdurrahman in Morocco, Sidi Saeed, Sidi Ta'i, the gentleman from Turkey. Turkey is more advanced than many other countries because of the peculiarities of your contemporary history and because of the strength of the Ottoman legacy. We need to retrieve all this, and we need to work on it. Again, you know what you said about Russell and language, it's sense, reference, you know, the distinction between sense and reference. Is it possible to have a sensible conversation about non-existent things that where there is no reference. Okay? And is it possible, on the other hand, to have the same reference but be completely different in the senses we talk about it? I mean, you're right that 20th century, especially analytic philosophy, recognizes the limitations of language, and there is much that can be done, and that's why the analytic theology project is very important. And making sure that we educate ourselves as quickly as we can, and it's vast. But education only happens through events like this and others where we are meeting people. Alhamdulillah, I am grateful to Sidi Suhail Nakhuda and the team for organizing things from Turkey to Cambridge to America and Canada, and I hope we can do more of this. Forgive me for taking too long in responding to these basic points.
Okay, I think we have to stop here because we need to move to the next session. So I think thanks to him, Prophet Khalid, for wonderful presentation, and we should give a big round of applause to him.
Thank you very much. And we're here for 2 days, so we can still continue the discussion, inshallah. All right. Forgive me if you didn't get a chance to ask.
We have like 10 minutes, yeah? Ready the calendar for session.
Thank you very much.
Çok teşekkürler hocam.
I really enjoyed it.
Thank you very
And
much.
I am happy that we have such a scholar.
Thank you
like
very much,
from
Sid.
the
Thank you.
Islamic world.
Thank you very much,
Thank you
Sid.
very
Thank you very much, Sid. Assalamu alaikum. Ahlan wa sahlan. كيف حالك? Alhamdulillah. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm fine.
You're Talha's
Yes,
sister.
sister.
Yeah. How are you?